Okay, the sun's shining and we're coming into the time of year where ground bait in the margins works really well. Whether it's big carp or F1s on little lakes, you know, feeding ground bait just draws fish in to your peg, and it's so effective when it starts to warm up. Go-to mixes, I tend to look for a mix, obviously mainly crushed pellets, ones with lots of crushed expanders, so match method like this one, Power Sonubaits, crushed expander on its own. Today we've got really deep margins, so I've opted for the marine version. This one has got heavier particles like crushed halibut pellets, and that keeps the bait on the bottom, so that's why I've used this today. So I'm going to run you through how I mix it for today's session, because it is important, quite, you know, what sort of consistency you get can make a big difference when you're fishing in the margins. I've got my free feeder, save that for later. So I can smell already that there's a lot of halibut in that, and importantly it's going to mix up quite heavy. But I can make it even heavier by adding loads of water to it. It can take quite a lot of water. I don't bother with drills on the bank, I don't want the extra disturbance. All I do is mix it by hand, and to be fair, when I mix it initially it turns out quite sort of a stodgy mess, but that's quite important to make sure that all the particles absorb all the water fully. So I'm going to mix the water in now, be quite generous with it, just going to be careful that I don't go too overboard. But if you can see at the minute, straight away it's gone quite stodgy. If you can see that, quite lumpy and stodgy. Just add a bit more. Be surprised how much you can add. I just get my hands dirty, don't bother with drills. You can see now it's quite a stodgy mess. That's probably not what we're looking for now, but if I leave that sort of quarter of an hour, 10 minutes, I'll come back to it, I'll push it through a riddle, and then I'll show you how I can alter this mix further to suit what's happening in my peg as I'm fishing, and how I alter the mix. So I'll come back to it in a minute. Okay, so we've left that a little while, quarter of an hour or so. If we look, still a bit of a lumpy, stodgy mess, big lumps in it. So now what I need to do is I've got my riddle here, it's a 4mm riddle. It's about right really for margin mix. You don't want something that's too fine really. And what I'm going to do, just push it through the riddle by hand rather than shake it. I need to, because it's so lumpy, I need to push some of these big pits into the riddle, keep it going through, and you see it's absorbed all that water. It's quite a heavy mix, really sticky, and that's important when you're feeding the margins when you're expecting to catch lots of fish, because you don't want them wafting around lots of bait and possibly causing problems with foul-hooked fish and stuff. You want to keep all that bait on the bottom. So we look now, that's quite a nice mix, fairly fluffy. You can do anything with that, you could fish that random method. So that's sort of the starting mix that I use for any session really. I get to my peg, mix the mix like this. When I am fishing down the edge and maybe I feel I need a bit of a stodgier mix, then I'll just have a bowl on my side tray. All I do, add a tiny bit of water to it. Obviously I need a bigger bowl really if I'm feeding lots of volume of ground bait. But then what you can do is you can make a really stodgy mix then. You can look at that, it's really stodgy, loads of water in it, but importantly when I feed that it's going to drop straight to the bottom and then break down, instead of possibly this breaking down halfway down. Obviously it depends what sort of depth I've got down the edge. Today I've got probably over 3 foot, which probably isn't ideal, so I'm going to end up mixing it really stodgy, I think, like this, just to get it straight down to the bottom where I want all the bait to settle, and hopefully that'll be the mix that catches lots of fish today. So there's how I mix my ground bait. Hopefully you've picked up a few tips, and happy fishing.